Section 19, Part 1, Chapter 4 of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4: The Cousin from Berlin. The studio of Julio Desnoyers was on the top floor, both the stairway and the elevator stopping before his door. The two tiny apartments at the back were lighted by an interior court, their only means of communication being the service stairway which went on up to the garrets. While his comrade was away, Argensola had made the acquaintance of those in the neighboring lodgings. The largest of the apartments was empty during the day, its occupants not returning till after they had taken their evening meal in a restaurant. As both husband and wife were employed outside, they could not remain at home except on holidays. The man, vigorous and of a martial aspect, was superintendent in a big department store. He had been a soldier in Africa, wore a military decoration, and had the rank of sub-lieutenant in the reserves. She was a blonde, heavy and rather anemic, with bright eyes and a sentimental expression. On holidays she spent long hours at the piano, playing musical reveries, always the same. At other times Argensola saw her through the interior window, working in the kitchen, aided by her companion, the two laughing over their clumsiness and inexperience in preparing the Sunday dinner. The concierge thought that this woman was a German, but she herself said that she was a Swiss. She was a cashier in a shop, not the one in which her husband was employed. In the mornings they left home together, separating in the Place d'Etoile. At 7 in the evening they met here, greeting each other with a kiss, like lovers who meet for the first time, and then after supper they returned to their nest in the Rue de la Pompe. All Argensola's attempts at friendliness with these neighbors were repulsed because of their self-centeredness. They responded with freezing courtesy. They lived only for themselves. The other apartment of 2 rooms was occupied by a single man. He was a Russian or Pole who almost always returned with a package of books, and passed many hours writing near the patio window. From the very first, the Spaniard took him to be a mysterious man, probably a very distinguished one, a true hero of a novel. The foreign appearance of this Tchernoff made a great impression upon him. His disheveled beard and oily locks, his spectacles upon a large nose that seemed deformed by a dagger thrust. There emanated from him, like an invisible nimbus, an odor of cheap wine and soiled clothing. When Argensola caught a glimpse of him through the service door, he would say to himself, "Ah, friend Tchernoff is returning," and thereupon he would saunter out to the stairway in order to have a chat with his neighbor. For a long time the stranger discouraged all approach to his quarters, which fact led the Spaniard to infer that he devoted himself to alchemy and kindred mysteries. When he finally was allowed to enter, he saw only books, many books, books everywhere, scattered on the floor, heaped upon benches, piled in corners, overflowing onto broken down chairs, old tables, and a bed that was only made up now and then when the owner, alarmed by the increasing invasion of dust and cobwebs, was obliged to call in the aid of his friend, the concierge. Argensola finally realized, not without a certain disenchantment, that there was nothing mysterious in the life of the man. What he was writing near the window were merely translations, some of them ordered, others volunteer work for the socialist periodicals. The only marvelous thing about him was the quantity of languages that he knew. "He knows them all," said the Spaniard when describing their neighbor to Desnoyers. "He has only to hear of a new one to master it. He holds the key, the secret of all languages, living or dead. He speaks Castilian as well as we do, and yet he has never been in a Spanish-speaking country." Argensola again felt a thrill of mystery upon reading the titles of many of the volumes. The majority were old books, many of them in languages that he was not able to decipher, picked up for a song at second-hand shops or in the bookstands installed upon the parapets of the Seine. Only a man holding the key of tongues could get together such volumes. An atmosphere of mysticism, of superhuman insight, of secrets intact for many centuries, appeared to emanate from these heaps of dusty volumes with worm eaten leaves. And mixed with these ancient tomes were others, red and conspicuous, pamphlets of socialistic propaganda, leaflets in all the languages of Europe, and periodicals, many periodicals with revolutionary titles. Tchernoff did not appear to enjoy visits and conversation. He would smile enigmatically into his black beard and was very sparing with his words, so as to shorten the interview. But Argensola possessed the means of winning over this sullen personage. It was only necessary for him to wink one eye with the expressive invitation, "Do we go?" and the two would soon be settled on a bench in the kitchen of Desnoyers' studio, opposite a bottle which had come from the avenue Victor Hugo. The costly wines of Don Marcelo made the Russian more communicative, although in spite of this aid, the Spaniard learned little of his neighbor's real existence. Sometimes he would mention Jaurès and other socialistic orators. His surest means of existence was the translation of periodicals or party papers. On various occasions, the name of Siberia escaped from his lips, and he admitted that he had been there a long time. But he did not care to talk about a country visited against his will. He would merely smile modestly, showing plainly that he did not wish to make any further revelations. The morning after the return of Julio Desnoyers, while Argensola was talking on the stairway with Tchernoff, the bell rang. How annoying! The Russian, who was well up in advanced politics, was just explaining the plans advanced by Jaurès. There were still many who hoped that war might be averted. He had his motives for doubting it. He, Tchernoff, was commenting on these illusions with the smile of a flat-nosed sphinx, when the bell rang for a second time, so that Argensola was obliged to break away from his interesting friend and run to open the main door. A gentleman wished to see Julio. He spoke very correct French, though his accent was a revelation for Argensola. Upon going into the bedroom in search of his master, who was just arising, he said confidently, "It's the cousin from Berlin who has come to say good bye. It could not be anyone else." When the three came together in the studio, Desnoyers presented his comrade in order that the visitor might not make any mistake in regard to his social status. "I have heard him spoken of. The gentleman is Argensola, a very deserving youth." Dr. Julius von Hartrott said this with the self-sufficiency of a man who knows everything and wishes to be agreeable to an inferior, conceding him the alms of his attention. The two cousins confronted each other with a curiosity not altogether free from distrust. Although closely related, they knew each other very slightly, tacitly admitting complete divergence in opinions and tastes. After slowly examining the sage, Argensola came to the conclusion that he looked like an officer dressed as a civilian. He noticed in his person an effort to imitate the soldierly when occasionally discarding uniform, the ambition of every German burgher wishing to be taken for the superior class. His trousers were narrow, as though intended to be tucked into cavalry boots. His coat, with the 2 rows of buttons, had the contracted waist, with very full skirt and upstanding lapels, suggesting vaguely a military greatcoat. The reddish moustachios, strong jaw, and shaved head completed his would-be martial appearance. But his eyes, large, dark-circled, and near-sighted, were the eyes of a student taking refuge behind great thick glasses, which gave him the aspect of a man of peace. Desnoyers knew that he was an assistant professor of the university, that he had published a few volumes, fat and heavy as bricks, and that he was a member of an academic society collaborating in documentary research directed by a famous historian. In his lapel he was wearing the badge of a foreign order. Julio's respect for the learned member of the family was not unmixed with contempt. He and his sister Chichi had from childhood felt an instinctive hostility toward the cousins from Berlin. It annoyed him, too, to have his family everlastingly holding up as a model this pedant who only knew life as it is in books, and passed his existence investigating what men had done in other epochs, in order to draw conclusions in harmony with Germany's views. While young Desnoyers had great facility for admiration, and reverenced all those whose arguments Argensola had doled out to him, he drew the line at accepting the intellectual grandeur of this illustrious relative. During his stay in Berlin, a German word for vulgar invention had enabled him to classify this prig. Heavy books of minute investigation were every month being published by the dozens in the fatherland. There was not a professor who could resist the temptation of constructing from the simplest detail an enormous volume written in a dull, involved style. The people, therefore, appreciating that these nearsighted authors were incapable of any genial vision of comradeship, called them Sitzfleisch haben, because of the very long sittings which their works represented. That was what this cousin was for him, a mere Sitzfleisch haben. Dr. von Hartrott, on explaining his visit, spoke in Spanish. He availed himself of this language used by the family during his childhood as a precaution, looking around repeatedly as if he feared to be heard. He had come to bid his cousin farewell. His mother had told him of his return, and he had not wished to leave Paris without seeing him. He was leaving in a few hours, since matters were growing more strained. "But do you really believe that there will be war?" asked Desnoyers. "War will be declared tomorrow or the day after. Nothing can prevent it now. It is necessary for the welfare of humanity." Silence followed this speech, Julio and Argensola looking with astonishment at this peaceable looking man who had just spoken with such martial arrogance. The two suspected that the professor was making this visit in order to give vent to his opinions and enthusiasms. At the same time, perhaps, he was trying to find out what they might think and know, as one of the many viewpoints of the people in Paris. "You are not French," he added, looking at his cousin. "You were born in Argentina, so before you I may speak the truth." "And were you not born there?" asked Julio, smiling. The doctor made a gesture of protest, as though he had just heard something insulting. "No, I am a German. No matter where a German may be born, he always belongs to his mother country." Then, turning to Argensola, "This gentleman, too, is a foreigner. He comes from noble Spain, which owes to us the best that it has, the worship of honor, the knightly spirit." The Spaniard wished to remonstrate, but the sage would not permit, adding in an oracular tone: "You were miserable Celts, sunk in the vileness of an inferior and mongrel race, whose domination by Rome but made your situation worse. Fortunately, you were conquered by the Goths and others of our race, who implanted in you a sense of personal dignity. Do not forget, young man, that the Vandals were the ancestors of the Prussians of today." Again Argensola tried to speak, but his friend signed to him not to interrupt the professor, who appeared to have forgotten his former reserve and was working up to an enthusiastic pitch with his own words. "We are going to witness great events," he continued. "Fortunate are those born in this epoch, the most interesting in history. At this very moment, humanity is changing its course. Now the true civilization begins." The war, according to him, was going to be of a brevity hitherto unseen. Germany had been preparing herself to bring about this event without any long economic world disturbance. A single month would be enough to crush France, the most to be feared of their adversaries. Then they would march against Russia, who with her slow, clumsy movements could not oppose an immediate defense. Finally, they would attack haughty England, so isolated in its archipelago that it could not obstruct the sweep of German progress. progress. This would make a series of rapid blows and overwhelming victories, requiring only a summer in which to play this magnificent role. The fall of the leaves in the following autumn would greet the definite triumph of Germany. With the assurance of a professor who does not expect his dictum to be refuted by his hearers, he explained the superiority of the German race. All mankind was divided into two groups, dolicephalus and the brachycephalus, according to the shape of the skull. Another scientific classification divided men into the light-haired and dark-haired. The dolicephalus, arched heads, represented purity of race and superior mentality. The brachycephalus, flat heads, were mongrels with all the stigma of degeneration. The German, dolicephalus par excellence, was the only descendant of the primitive Aryans. All the other nations, especially those of the south of Europe, called Latins, belonged to a degenerate humanity. The Spaniard could not contain himself any longer. But no person with any intelligence believes any more in those antique theories of race. What if there no longer existed a people of absolutely pure blood, owing to thousands of admixtures due to historical conquests? Many Germans bore the identical ethnic marks which the professor was attributing to the inferior races. "There is something in that," admitted Hartrott. "But although the German race may not be perfectly pure, it is the least impure of all races, and therefore should have dominion over the world." His voice took on an ironic and cutting edge when speaking of the Celts, inhabitants of the lands of the south. They had retarded the progress of humanity, deflecting it in the wrong direction. The Celt is individualistic and consequently an ungovernable revolutionary who tends to socialism. Furthermore, he is a humanitarian and makes a virtue of mercy, defending the existence of the weak who do not amount to anything. The illustrious German places above everything else method and power. Elected by nature to command the impotent races, he possesses all the qualifications that distinguish the superior leader. The French Revolution was merely a clash between Teutons and Celts. The nobility of France were descended from Germanic warriors, established in the country after the so-called invasion of the barbarians. The middle and lower classes were the Gallic Celtic element. The inferior race had conquered the superior, disorganizing the country and perturbing the world. Celtism was the inventor of democracy, of the doctrines of socialism and anarchy. Now the hour of Germanic retaliation was about to strike, and the northern race would re-establish order, since God had favored it by demonstrating its indisputable superiority. A nation, he added, can aspire to great destinies only when it is fundamentally Teutonic. The less German it is, the less its civilization amounts to. We represent the aristocracy of humanity, the salt of the earth, as our Williams said. End of section 19. Recording by Tony Oliva, Albuquerque, New Mexico.